right, Matt. So let's get started today by talking a little bit about your background. You've had quite a career in industrial engineering and distribution. So can you just talk a little bit about your past roles and of course anything
Sure.
about those that you actively carry forward in the work you're doing today?
Yeah, of course, and obviously, thanks for having me on, Kelly. Really appreciate the invite. So, a little bit about my background. I was, let's see, first 10 years of my career, I was at Walmart. So, I was doing industrial automation and industrial design and automating a lot of their distribution centers, both domestic and international. Dabbled a little bit in the supply chain as well with Walmart, so I had a pretty good career there, and then left Walmart and went to a clothing company called Stitch Fix, where, I joined Stitch Fix about 2.5 years prior to them going public. I was really brought on to kinda shore up the operation and develop an automation strategy for them, and ended up running all of their operation and transportation for the last year and a half or 2 years that I was there prior to coming to Mytra. And I will tell you, I was brought on to develop an automation strategy, and my first automation strategy when I first joined was don't automate. So that it goes a little counterintuitive to my background and what I had been doing, and obviously what we're doing here at Mytra. And I had a really good reason for it at the time, but obviously ended up developing an automation strategy to help the operation be more efficient and more effective. Um, and then ultimately met Chris Walty, the co-founder of Mytra here through a mutual connection. He pitched me on what he was doing. We actually weren't deploying large scale automation at Stitch Fix at the time, but I just got so hooked on what he was building that I ended up uh, kind of knocking on his door and saying, I want to help you build this thing through the lens of the customer and the commercial, because I've always been on the other side of the table, and it's been interesting 2 years being over here and helping Mytra kind of build the product through the lens of the customer.
So let's talk just for a minute because we're actually going to explore like all around and through this idea. What does Mytra do? Obviously, you're in the supply chain because you're here, but where specifically does Mytra focus?
Yeah, we are warehouse automation, and we are specifically solving material flow. So it's the most common problem in warehouses, or the most common function in warehouses and operation today. And we really think of ourselves as a essentially a material flow hub. And so all of your material can flow in, it can be stored, and then as needed, it can flow out. So it's not just flow in, it's picked, and then it goes out the door if you need to quality control it, or if you need to check it, or you want to do inventory audits at the end of the year. We really want to be that material flow hub for the operation. There's a larger, longer case where we could deploy ourselves in manufacturing environments and other environments as well. But right now, we're very focused on solving for warehousing and solving for fulfillment operations.
Now, when you think about those workflows, I'm sure efficiency is a huge part of what you do. And I'm sure when companies first sit down and have this conversation with you, they sort of have something in mind around what they're looking to achieve, whether it's process specific or whether it happens to be a business outcome. What tend to be some of the most common or the most significant obstacles associated with trying to streamline these existing or ongoing operations?
Yeah, most of our customers are solving for efficiency, they're solving for throughput, or they're solving for density in their operation, right? So they're either trying to store more material, more pallets in the warehouse or in the four walls in the physical environment that they live in, or they're trying to be more effective with their labor and with their processes, so that they could get more material out the door. uh, the reality is most of our customers actually want to solve all of it, and they want to solve it in a very flexible way,
Yeah.
which tends to be the biggest challenge. How do you deploy an automation solution that both solves for density, meaning you could put more material in, also solves for throughput, meaning you could get more material in and out, but also has a very high degree of flexibility, which means that uh, if I don't know what is going to happen in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I don't know what my inventory is gonna look like. Sure, there's always gonna be a baseline, but
Mm.
businesses are always gonna continually evolve. How do you solve for all 3 of those, right? How do you develop some generally, you're making some very, very hard trade-offs. You're
Yeah.
gonna say, I want something that is highly flexible because I don't know where our future is, whether we're a young company or we think we're kind of transitioning our inventory model, or our customers or our consumers are transitioning, and therefore we need to change our inventory. But if you're building something that is highly flexible, you're often saying, it's not going to be as dense, or I'm not going to be able to have the high degrees of throughput. And in other environments, we kind of saw this collision during the pandemic, to be honest, when it was like everybody was solving for everything, and that continues to be the case. And what Mytra is doing here is, we essentially have a a 3D AMR. It's cube based. It's a pallet based platform, so we have the ability to store full pallets, and you could build the system like Lego blocks. And so it is the first time in my career that I've seen a a system or a solution that you can deploy a single cell or 100
Mhm.
cells or 10,000 cells or 50,000 cells at a time. Traditionally, with large scale automation, you have to go fairly big even in the beginning in order
Yeah.
for that automation to be effective. And here we're able to do some very, very small systems to be able to test, to be able to get to know the customer, to be able to validate integrations, and then you can expand into much larger systems. Um, and I think that we are actually finding that intersection between flexibility, velocity and throughput, and density.
Now, a couple of follow-up questions based on that. First of all, for anybody not familiar, what's an AMR?
Mm. An AMR is a autonomous mobile robot. So you have it's a robot that has the ability to essentially navigate amongst fixed infrastructure. The other term you may hear is like an AGV, which is very similar, but an AGV is an auto-guided vehicle, so it just has a fixed path. So it
Mhm.
is, it you are essentially giving that AGV, here's point A, there is point B, and here is the path it is to get there, versus an AMR is essentially, here's point A, there's point B. Navigate the environment to be able to get to point B. Um, and just to elaborate a little bit on when I said
Yeah.
3D AMRs, right? So we're developing a 3D AMR, or have developed a 3D AMR. What I mean by that is you can go, traditional AMRs go in the XY plane. So they go, forward, backward, left, and right. That's your XY. We also have the ability, combined with our structure, to be able to go in the Z direction. And so it is truly a fully autonomous vehicle in the sense that it has full kinematic freedom. You go left, right, forward, backwards, and you can also go up and down. So you don't need elevators, you don't need lifts, you don't need other mechanisms to move the bots. You actually have full autonomy in a structure.
Now, it's an interesting time, I'm sure, to be in robotics because even around terminology, a lot of times now we're talking about robotics when it's actually like I think about robotic process automation. That's not a physical robot at all. That's a, digital program that's written to sort of like streamline a process.
Yeah.
Where does the line exist between what the physical AMR is capable of versus what the software you have designed to go with it is capable of?
The I think you're kind of stumping me on this one, Kelly. Because I think that the 2 work hand in hand. So it's such a blurry line, right?
Mm.
It's so difficult now in our environment to understand, where that line is. But ultimately, the physical robot is the physical thing, the hardware that is doing the task, that the thing that you see and the thing that is operating. And the software is the conductor. It is the brain that is informing the robot on what to do and how to be and how to optimize. And I think what we're doing here is a little bit different than what is common in the market. And oftentimes there's just this big monster brain, and that is your software. And if that goes down, everything goes
Mhm.
down. And here we're developing more of our robots have more of a hive mind mentality. Now, ultimately, there is a brain, right? There is a brain that is orchestrating, making decisions, but all of our robots have CPU. They all have processing power. They all are able to operate autonomously for a period of time. And so even if the brain goes down, our bots still have the ability to finish and complete a number of tasks for a number of hours while the brain is coming back online. And so it is in our world, what we hope is that there is more of a blur between
Mm.
the software and the hardware instead of this hard line of, well, that is the hardware, this is the software. Software goes down, you cannot use your hardware. We are trying to find that. Um, we are trying to develop the flexibility to where you have both um, the ability to recover regardless of whether if your software goes down or your hardware goes down, you still have the ability to function in your operation. Um, Downtime is super critical for these warehouses, right?
Yes.
Seconds. I mean, when you look at Amazon, they measure processes in seconds, and they're continually trying to optimize at the second. How many seconds can we reduce from this process? If companies are looking at improving their processes at that level of detail, can you imagine if a warehouse goes down for an hour? The
Yeah.
the implication that that has on customer orders, the cost that it has to the business is astronomical. And so we're trying to, again, going back to what we're doing at Mytra, is we're trying to have a system that is very redundant and very reliable and has the ability to operate in the numerous cases that we've seen in the past of where you have single points of failure in your operation.
And I actually think your comment about the blurred line is a really interesting one. Because I think with so much of the automation we deal with today, and I mean, literally, that could be everything from, like we're talking about here, there is a physical robot to embedding generative AI in some kind of program in a way that people don't even know that they're using it, right? I think
Yeah.
the most successful solutions these days, whether it's physical or whether it's software, it's almost like the more you can blur the line and the smoother that blur is, it's not that you wanna trick somebody into using some form of AI or trick somebody into using a robot, but that seamlessness, when you're striving for excellence measured in seconds, you do need everything to be very smooth if it's going to work.
Yeah.
Now,
I mean, look at
given
your iPhone. Look at your iPhone. It's
absolutely.
the same thing, right? Nobody's like, "Oh, I'm using my software now. Okay, now I'm using my hardware now." It's
Yeah.
it's 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 the same thing, right? So,
Absolutely. So thinking differently about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're achieving it. You talked about the fact that when you start working with companies, they're usually trying to achieve a few things at the same time in parallel. As they bring those objectives to you and you know what the Mitra solution is capable of, what are those conversations like around planning out? I don't know if you use a word like implementation or if it's more like installation because there's a physical element to it, but the planning that goes into making that possible, what do those conversations tend to focus around?
yeah. They the conversations always start, with the customer's data, and data can mean a lot of things, but we're generally looking at, what is your SKU profile? What does your inventory snapshot look like? What are your processes? What are your efficiencies? What is your head count? How effective are they, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and it's generally a data pull, but honestly, it's even when we pull the data is really murky until you physically go on site. So
Okay.
we're always saying we have to physically go on site and really actually map the processes out. So whether we're using a CAD diagram or something else, We are physically mapping that space and trying to understand all of the nuances of the operation. And then you're combining that with the data analysis to be able to get a really clear understanding of the operation. And I would say our customers generally fall into two camps. They're either, they either hand it over and say, help me solve my problem. The problem is all, like I don't know if it's on my dock. I don't know if it's with my inventory. It's kind of all. I want to solve it all. So Mytra, please provide me with the most optimal and the best solution. And we can do that. And we often do. But we have a lot of sophisticated customers as well that are like, no, I want you to come in my operation and then I'm going to show you this specific area. This is the thing that we have not been able to solve.
Okay.
So whether that's on a dock and we're solving for what we call a dock buffer, and that means your inventory is flowing in and you're able to store and you're able to sequence that inventory before it goes into the warehouse or before it goes out on the trailer, or whether it's solving for inventory, whether it's solving for picking. We have customers that live in both camps.
Mm.
And so we generally are going to develop a solution set or sometimes multiple solutions that then are going to show it both highlights our flexibility, but also shows the customer, hey, here are all the options that you can do. Here's the way that you can build this out. And here are the phases in which you can deploy this solution. You can start real small with only, say, 100 cells and moving inventory in and out of those 100 cells. Make sure you get the integration right. Make sure you test it. Or we have other customers that want to start larger and go with, say, 1,000 to 5,000 cells and then grow that into 30, 40, 50,000 cells. And we really give them the option. And some of them some of them are driven by speed and the speed at which they can deploy. So they'll want to deploy a much smaller system so they could get bolts in the ground and start utilizing our automation. And then some of them are more motivated by the initial ROI and saying, I need
Okay.
an initial return on investment with anything that goes in my facility. I need some form of return on investment rather than, testing in a really small form. Let's start with a larger, say 1,000 cells. Let's get some sort of a return on our investment. And then we grow into the larger facility where you see the highest amount of return on investment for the customer.
Does the divide between those approaches tend to have something to do with the margin of the business, where we have to get this ROI because we are, profitable at scale, but relatively low margin on a per order basis? Or does it tend to be more driven by the nature of the problem that they're trying to crack?
It's a little bit more, it's a little less driven by the margin of the business. So we've had both low margin businesses that we operate with and very high margin. I will tell you, high margin is a little bit easier. You have, but you tend to in the high margin businesses, and this is more what my operational background. It is a lot easier when you have a high margin and you have a lot more flexibility. Whereas in your low margin businesses, you generally have to be very ticked and tied with your processes because every penny counts. And so you can't afford to be inefficient with either your workforce and your processes or inefficient with your inventory. But in terms of the customers, it's less about the margin of their business and actually generally more towards their level of sophistication in automation. So we have the customers that are able to bring us in and say, this is exactly the problem we need to solve and I need you to solve, generally have at least moderate levels of automation riddled throughout their supply chain.
Okay.
And so they understand automation very well, and they have an understanding of the problems that they have not been able to solve or can solve with the new technologies that are coming out on the market, obviously like Mytra. The ones that are less sophisticated or have less amount of automation in their warehouses, those are the ones that are generally saying, we're on our automation journey. We're starting it. We can start anywhere. Please help, provide an initial map for us to absorb and for us to understand. And then with that, we will start to work with you to be able to make the decision on where the most effective location is for our initial install. how and when to deploy it, and again, going back to the return on investment, what that return on investment would be.
Anytime we're talking about automation, especially robotics, in fact, I'm thinking in the back of my head as you and I connect here in mid-December, I feel like the talks are starting to simmer about the East and Gulf Coast ports again, right? Because we've gotten a
Yeah.
reprieve on that strike. But anytime we talk about automation, I feel like it's required to address the point of how does this potentially affect jobs, affect the human beings that are working in the area where you have the Mytra system set up or that need to interact with it directly through software and the controls that you put in place. Does that end up being a concern here, or is it more of an augmentation?
The I think as a headline, it's a concern. It's a very catchy headline when you talk about, the interaction of automation and the interaction with human, and there's this divide, and, it must be one or the other. And look, my whole background has been in automation and automation development, and even it's like you'll read one of those headlines that'll pop up, and the human side of all of us has an initial reaction to it, right? So we have that emotional pull to group together as humans, and fight the automation. But the reality is you cannot have one without the other, and they are very much working together. And we have, to use an example, we had one customer, they experience there's one of the functions within the facility experiences a 500% turnover, and they have 20, I think it was 22 was the exact number, 22 jobs that were just perpetually unfilled.
Okay.
And so they're, as we're looking for a solution for them, and we designed one and developed one for them, the headline could be replaces jobs, but in reality, these are jobs that they cannot staff. They cannot find the people. They're trying every mechanism under the sun to try to get
Yeah.
people into those positions. And the hard thing about it is not only are those 20 positions unfilled, the other, 20 people that are doing the job, it's much harder on them. Like,
Mhm.
can you imagine where, all of our jobs, all of our companies and everything we worked for, we were understaffed by 50%, or we had half of the people. Like, the work still has to get done.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard, it's really hard on the operators when a warehouse or an operation is not fully staffed. I've lived it before, and I lived it very much so going through the pandemic as well, when it was really hard to get people to come in. And when that happened, it was really hard on the people who would come in because they had almost an insurmountable work to get out the door. It was like the never-ending task list of just like, I'm never gonna see the end of this, and that burns people out,
Yeah.
and then people end up wanting to leave, and then the cycle continues, right? The
Mhm.
open positions continue. And so a lot of what we're doing is honestly creating optimizations that help fill those voids. And then in addition, we're also adding new roles, new positions. We're also making the job, frankly, safer, because like forklift operations, while they are very safe, there is still a number of instances. I mean, you could go on YouTube and you could look up the videos of
Oh,
forklift operator
absolutely.
like clipping standard pallet racking, and then the whole thing falls down, and it's ultimately catastrophic. And so we are creating a safer environment by deploying automation. And then I know that it gets tossed out very often of you're also creating new positions, but it's oftentimes not talked about what are the positions. Some of them are unknown, right? You don't know
Yeah.
until you deploy the automation to kind of understand. And an example I have from my past is we deployed AMRs in our warehouse, and we ended up creating a role and a job function called a robot wrangler. It's very cheeky. It's name.
But who doesn't want that job? Probably helps with hiring. I would
Exactly.
sign up for that.
Exactly, and it was fantastic because the folks that we moved into that role, both we gave them an education on the robot. They needed to know how to troubleshoot it, they needed to understand the ins and outs, and here were people who are like, "I have no robot experience," and now they do, and so they actually the 3 people that we brought in, um, or 2 of them were actually internal, absolutely loved it, and then kinda created this new, passion for them of wanting to understand actually robotics and wanting to understand automation, and in the past, they had not had that interaction, and so it was one of those examples of where it was just a great opportunity to create a new role and to give people new experiences. And in operations can be redundant, right? It's
Absolutely.
you're getting cases and you're getting eaches or you're getting orders out the door day in and day out. And so it's really nice to be able to introduce some of these new function and new roles, and really exercise the brain a bit by learning something new. So we've seen high degrees of favorability there for taking on some new tasks and learning new pieces of equipment and new pieces of automation.
And new data, I'm sure. I mean, a system like this that probably requires an enormous amount of data to run, I imagine also creates an awful lot of data. Is having access to that part of sort of the adjustment of having the system in place, in addition to the efficiency and safety and operational benefits, the information that they're getting back must also change the way they think about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It's critical for us to be able to tee up the right information for the customer because it can be overwhelming, right? The amount of information we're starting to get now, and the amount of information that we will get if we just teed it all up. I mean, I know if it came, if it all just came on my screen of like, here's every bit of information that our system has, like I would just fall. I would shut my laptop,
Yeah.
right? I would walk
Too
away.
much.
I would ju
Yeah.
it's too much, and so it's key for us to be able to, synthesize that data and that information and really serve it up in a way that the operations can effectively use it, both in the day-to-day for picking operations, what's coming out, what's ready, what's gonna be sequenced, what needs to
Mm.
go on the trailer, when does it need to go on the trailer, those types of information for pallet flow. But ultimately, we also wanna get to a point to where we are taking insights from that information. All of the inventory is going to be flowing into the Mytra system. And so we have this, unique look at where the inventory lives. How often does it move? Is it stagnant? Is it selling? Is it not selling? Is it being returned? Are there issues? Is it constantly going through quality control? And taking all of that inventory information, and hopefully we can feed that to the organizations so that they could start making better inventory and purchasing decisions upstream, even though that lives way outside of the Mytra system. Today, we want to be able to take that data and take that information and help them inform the rest of their business. We build all of our business case on the operation and what's happening in the four walls. So we don't take credit for what we could do on the inventory side, but there is a future world where you could say, hey, we have, a lot less, you know, bad purchases or stagnant inventory that isn't moving that ultimately gets liquidated and oftentimes destroyed. And so anything that we can do to help companies and organizations make better inventory purchasing decisions is, we are all for it.
And I imagine, especially in cases where inventory may be seasonal or have a limited shelf life, either in terms of customer demand or in terms of the product, being able to really hit efficiency around that, it eliminates all different kinds of waste, certainly wasted funds, but to your point too, now you're adding things to the literal waste stream, and so getting more efficient around your seasonal material or product flows is probably a huge advantage.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Seasonal is hard. Seasonal is just hard. I mean,
Seasonal's hard.
it's
Yeah.
really difficult. I mean, you're guessing, right? Our buyers or the buyers are guessing at what the consumer is going to want,
Yeah.
and then you're purchasing it, and then you're cramming it into this really really tight window of, you know, purchase the thing, get it out the door, and then, you know, hopefully it's the thing that sells. And then also on the back end, post holiday season, it's like you have this flood of returns that comes back in. Um, And it's just it is a very difficult time frame for operations. And so the more you can do to help decision making and help efficiency and effectiveness during that time to take, the pressure off of the operation, the better off the operation is going to be during that time frame.
Yeah. Well, for that, I think back to my own time in consulting, where if I took one thing away from that time, it was the idea that hope is not a strategy. Like, hope is wonderful. We should all have it. It's great. You certainly don't want to be in an environment without it. But if you're counting on that as your strategy, right to your point with the seasonality, hoping something sells, that's your thing.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope there's some math or analysis somewhere underpinning that hope
Yep.
because you certainly can't grow and scale a profitable business on hope alone.
Yeah. No, no, you cannot. I think there's always room for a little bit of hope. We always used to I remember at Walmart, we used to hope we could fit all the inventory into our warehouse leading into the holiday seasons. But I agree. It was, the more methodical and the more accurate you could be in that, like you just really would
Yeah.
you'd like to follow the numbers versus sit there with your fingers crossed, hoping when that
Yeah.
inventory shows up at your warehouse.
Now, when you and I talked previously, you had mentioned that you often get into a business and find that there's some kind of disconnect between what is sold and then what is actually deployed in
Mhm,
and by the business. Can you talk a little
mhm.
bit about what you meant by that and how it sort of connects to the other things we've talked about today?
Yeah, there's oftentimes you experience kind of the sales organization and then the deployment and execution part of the organization of material handling equipment and material handling companies. And you're sold on a dream, and that dream is the thing that gets you to sign on the dotted line. And then when it gets to actually, design and implementation and execution of it, it's I would often hear, "Oh, well, that was sales, right? That was the
Yeah.
sales. That was the
You're in
sales
ops
team."
now.
You're like, welcome to reality.
Yeah.
This is actually what we can do, and what we're doing here. So, I'm responsible for the commercial org here at Mytra, and one of the things it was kind of an early aha moment, and then we recently rolled this out is that we have our sales, our solutions, pricing, design, that whole, top of funnel team that's really helping get customers in the door rolls up under me, but I am also responsible for integration, deployment, and sustainment of the
Mm.
system. And so you can see where I'm going with this
Yes.
is that our customers, so there is a single point at Mytra that is responsible for that customer interaction. So we cannot be in a scenario where we say, oh, that's this team. Sorry, this is what we're actually going to do. Here we're in a scenario where those teams throughout the customer's journey are one team and one team working together to ensure that what we're selling and the solutions that we're providing for our customers are the things that they are actually getting and what we are actually deploying at their warehouse, because ultimately we want our deployments to be successful. We want our customers to be happy. We are a very customer centric organization, and for us, that, that customer satisfaction and that customer happiness actually leads to more Mytra business, more Mytra deployments. I mean, a lot of our I mean, most of our customers today have anywhere from 10 to, I think the highest we have is like 410 warehouses. And if you solve for one of those, then you could replicate that design and help the
Okay.
rest of those operations be effective and be efficient. And so we really need to ensure that what we're selling is what we're delivering, and what we're delivering leads to customer satisfaction and customer happiness.
Yeah. So, last question for you, Matt. When I think about what you're trying to allow companies to do with the warehouse space that they have, and also the efficiency of their material flows, you've talked about the fact that helping them see how all of that connects to their financial and operational metrics is really important, right? The whole thing needs to be cohesive. As I think about use of space and material flows, it reminds me of that, I don't know, challenge when I was a kid, like, can you pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time? Right? They're definitely connected challenges, but we think about them in different ways. You joked about like, we really hope we can fit all this stuff in our Walmart warehouse. But thinking about the flows of materials and product through those warehouses, it's almost like a different part of your brain.
Mhm.
How do we start to make sure that our thinking is aligned with the opportunity present? I know this is like a huge, huge question to kind of round this out
You saw
on.
you saw my face.
Like, okay, let's see if Matt can pat his head and rub his stomach at the same time.
Yeah.
But do you see what I'm saying? It's like you can't just
Yeah.
think about how much space do I have access to, or whether it's because of seasonality or customer demand or whatever it is, leading product to be drawn through my warehouse. How do we start to think more comprehensively about the opportunity of getting that right?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is that I think our tooling and our tools are getting better. So we're actually able to, assess and analyze those
Mm.
things when we're doing our design. So whether it's, whether it's in the simulations that we do of an environment instead of a simulation focusing on a single function the simulation can actually simulate the entire process
Uh,
end to end. I think is really an initial part of unlocking that part of the brain, because when you actually see something is possible, I think that is the thing that creates the unlock for the brain to start to then view the problem differently, right? And if you look at automation and you look at, you know, s- especially what kind of happened during, I guess, e-commerce boom and then the pandemic,
right.
the way of thinking was actually a single point of like, what is the single problem and how do I solve that single problem? Now I'm going to develop some form of automation or some robot to do that single thing. And I go back to all the way back to my original point of Mytra thinking of itself as a material flow hub.
Mhm.
It's not solving a single problem. It is solving for a series of problems, right? A series of events and a series of things that happen in a warehousing environment. And that's everything from storage, inventory velocity, inventory glut, all of the things that you run into that you're trying to solve for during the course of, whether it's 24 hours or whether it's a single shift or it's during the course of, a quarter or a year of your operation, you're able to actually effectively um, change and manipulate your operation when you have a flexible automation solution that allows you to be able to adjust almost on the fly
Mm.
with the things that you are going to encounter. So part of it is bringing it, when you see that there's a solution out there that can do that, and then you have the tools to be able to assess it, you're combining those two things. Now you're looking at the problem holistically versus a single problem that you were trying to solve or a single function. You're now looking end to end to try to figure out how is the best way to solve this problem and what are honestly my upper bounds and my upper limits for each one of those situations. And then you're making a decision point to say, okay, this is how I'm going to solve this at this point in time. Because if we go back to talking about the holiday season, you know, it is a much different problem at the beginning of the season when all of the inventory floods in and you're cramming it into your warehouse to the end of the season when you're trying to flood and flow that out. And you need solutions that have the ability to be to flex in both of those environments and not just solve for one or the other.
Yeah. No, and I think so many times even if you can fix that one tiny little isolated problem, okay, maybe that's like a band-aid, right? It gets you through the situation. But there's also just as likely a chance that what you're actually fixing is a symptom. It's not
Yeah.
the problem. And so looking at the whole system, the whole process, all of the flows comprehensively, thank goodness there are tools now that can stand up to the challenges that we're trying to face today. Because if there's anything that everybody learned from the last few years, it's that you talk about measuring uh, supply chain performance in terms of minutes. It's not just the one company that gets affected by it; it's all of us. It's the general public, right? Um, Incredibly interesting conversation, Matt. I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you for being with me so early in your morning.
Absolutely, Kelly.
If people are hearing you talk to me, meeting you for the first time this way,
Yeah.
hearing about Mytra for the first time, what is the best way for them to connect and to learn more?
Go on to Mytra.ai. So you'll go onto our website and there's going to be a contact form there. The contact form essentially goes to hello@mytra.ai. So either one of those work is a great way to reach out. And we have a lot of information on our website as well about our product. Kelly, I really appreciate the invite. This was a fun conversation. I'm glad we were able to make it happen.
Me as well. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.